Hey folks, this is Abel James, and thanks so much for joining us on the show. When you know what you're supposed to do, what keeps you from actually doing it? We're all guilty at times of procrastination, pleasure seeking, indulging in distraction and escapism, and even self-sabotage. Perhaps it's all part of the human condition. But since knowing what to do is different from actually doing it, it's essential to set up systems in our lives to make healthy choices the default option. And sometimes we need a little bit of help to get out of our own way. By helping you work through the subconscious emotional blocks that prevent you from taking positive action, finding the right coach and accountability partner can make a massive difference in your long-term results. As today's guest quips, I can't help people solve their problems until I find out why they like having them. Today we're here with our friend Adam Gilbert, the founder of My Body Tutor. Whether you're a seasoned athlete, a busy parent, a coach, or just dipping your toes into health and fitness, you'll walk away with actionable strategies and a renewed sense of motivation to make positive and lasting changes in your life. In this episode, you'll discover how to identify and overcome common self-sabotaging patterns and behaviors, the role of hormone replacement therapy and other trends in the pursuit of health and longevity, advice for parents who are trying to balance their own health goals with the demands of raising young children, how to find joy and fulfillment in your journey toward health rather than viewing it as a sacrifice, and much more. Let's go hang out with Adam. Welcome back, folks. Today I'm stoked to be here with Adam Gilbert, trainer, author, and founder of My Body Tutor, a company he created to help people stop making excuses when it comes to health and fitness by providing personal accountability. Adam has been featured on Good Morning America, U.S. News and World Report, Shape Magazine, Huffington Post, Mashable.com, and many more. How's it going, Adam?
It's going well. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, dude, me too. So why don't we start with kind of your origin story in health and fitness? For a lot of people, they only really start caring about it once they personally get sick. You know, they kind of have that urgency. But sometimes you can learn that from being around other people in your life who have kind of like come to that conclusion or need to radically change their lives. So how did you get into all of this?
Yeah, unfortunately, I got into it by witnessing my father have a heart attack. So when I was in seventh grade, we drove him to the hospital. My parents were divorced, so he called us up. My sister was driving at that time, started driving. We drove him to the hospital. He was having a heart attack. And a few days later, he had triple bypass surgery. So seeing that whole experience, seeing him, hooked up to all these monitors, seeing him go through the heart attack when we were driving him, he was sweating, he was extremely nervous. That was obviously very impactful. And then, unfortunately, later that year, he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. So seeing him deteriorate mentally and physically throughout the years until he passed away was obviously really hard. So I learned early on that health is true wealth, that without it, nothing really means anything, right? Health is, when you have it, it is the biggest lever that it improves every aspect of your life. And when you don't have it, it detracts from every aspect of your life. So that's how I started. It really made me realize that, when you have your health, as they say, you have unlimited wishes. And when you don't have your health, you only have one wish.
But in your own personal life, in your business life, you kind of were taking another path for a while there, right? Working in hedge funds and private equity for a few years. And I started in consulting as well. And for me, it was my own kind of like reckoning with poor health by virtue of having really great insurance and following the wrong advice from that consulting work. So anyway, what was it like for you making that career transition from, kind of making the big bucks and having the prestige of a nice corporate job, but maybe wanting to do something a little bit different with your time on this earth?
Yeah. So, my passion has always been health and fitness for, since at least seventh grade when my father had the heart attack. But my parents always encouraged me to, go the safe corporate route. So I was working at Ernst & Young for a few years. But, literally within the first day, I had a stomachache walking to work. I'm like, this is not what I'm meant to be doing, because throughout the years, I'd been a personal trainer. And after 2 years, I quit my full-time job and to pursue this. So that was back in 2007, and have been at this ever since. And, it's funny though, because working at that job is actually what spurred the idea for My Body Tutor. So I'm grateful for that time, even though it was absolutely miserable.
How did it spur it?
So, I've always been the go-to guy for health and fitness. I was, like I said, I was training people on the side during college and throughout the years. And, I was always giving people kind of plans, right? So we'd come up with a nutrition plan and, based on client engagements, I'd see them a week or two later. And it was always the same story. It was always, I love the plan you made for me, but I got caught up with work, life, kids, happy hour. And it was always excuse after excuse. And I realized these people knew what to do. I had given them a plan they felt good about, but they couldn't follow through. And that's where the idea of daily accountability and daily coaching came into play, right? What if I can be in touch with these people? What if I can support them and coach them and hold them accountable each and every day, no matter where we were? That was like the aha moment. And, I quit my job in January 2007. Everyone thought I was absolutely nuts. My mom, who always was like, go the safe route, because she's a former high school English teacher. So she's a very conservative person, health insurance, this and that. And she'd always say, like, all the people encouraging you to pursue your dream, they're not going to pay your bills. And, but I had to do it and I did it. And, thankfully I took the leap and, we've been at this since February of 2007 when I started this.
That's amazing. What was it like at the beginning? Did you have doubts when you took that leap, or did you start to, kind of get that momentum right away?
So I definitely had doubts. I mean, I was, my only goal at that point was I was living in New York City. I was fully self-sufficient, was to not move back home. And I don't even know if that was an option. I mean, I certainly don't know if my mom would have welcomed me with open arms. I mean, it was always like, your friends aren't going to pay your bills. Like, you have dreams, that's great, but you have to live in reality. But very quickly, the goal for us was we wanted to solve what I always thought was the biggest problem in health and fitness, which was a lack of consistency, right? My thesis was, for the most part, we know what's good for us. We know what's not good for us. The real question is, why can't we do it? And I think very quickly people took to that idea, right? Because we weren't selling this magic potion or this magic diet or this magic formula. It's like, you, for the most part, know what to do. We're going to make sure you're actually doing it. And thankfully, very quickly, we were very busy. So it wasn't a hockey stick growth by any means, but back then we were advertising on Facebook flyers. That was before it had the whole advertising system. And within 2 months we had to stop advertising because we couldn't handle the growth. So between February 2007, April 2007, we had enough clients where I had to turn it off, and that's how busy it got.
When it comes to daily accountability, what did that look like back then, and what does it look like now?
So back then it was people were kind of emailing me their nutrition plans. They're emailing me their nutrition, their prior day input, right? What they ate and then what they did for exercise. And now we have our own, proprietary app. So clients are uploading photos of what they ate or writing descriptions of what they ate in our app. And then every day the coach is writing back to them in our app.
And what is it about accountability that works for people? Or how does it work differently than other coaching programs where it's like, I know what to do, I just don't want to, or I can't achieve it, I can't build it into my life?
Yeah. So, I mean, what we obsess over is consistency. I truly believe that is the key to results. I think the real question is, why can't we stay consistent? And, number one, it's having a plan that's catered and customized to the client, right? Because right off the bat, if you're trying to follow some sort of, crazy diet, whether it's a cookie diet or a shake diet or a lettuce diet, like, you're doomed for failure from the start, right? So the first thing we're doing with our clients is making sure they feel good about the plan, making sure that it is based on the realities of their life. Number two, and we can kind of go into this later, is what we call their MPH, their mindset, psychology, and habits. But last but not least is the accountability. Because I think we're all very good at making promises to other people and keeping them. But when it comes to ourselves, we're not, right? And it's that external accountability, those external obligations, that can really be a massive game changer for people. When they commit to something and they know someone else is on the other end, that makes a huge difference versus just telling yourself, tomorrow I'm going to start fresh or Monday I'm going to start fresh. We know how that goes.
Let's talk about the MPH a little bit.
Yeah. So I believe success in all facets of life, a lot of it comes down to what's going on between our ears, right? And you can give someone the perfect diet or the perfect exercise plan or whatever it is, but there's all sorts of things that get in the way, right? And MPH is mindset, psychology, and habits. Your relationship with food, the way you think and react to food. Mental roadblocks, right? Things like fear of failure, fear of success, self-sabotage, all or nothing thinking. Those are all things that get in the way of success. And that if you don't address those, no diet in the world, no matter how perfect it is going to work.
What is the deal with self sabotage? It's so common. It seems like something that we shouldn't do to ourselves. We do it all the time.
Yeah. So, my definition of self sabotage is when you fear the very thing you say you want to accomplish, right? It's when you fear the very thing you say you want to accomplish, because on some level, when someone is self sabotaging, they don't believe their life will be better off reaching their goal. They actually believe it'll be worse off, right? So here's what I mean. Say someone says, I want to lose weight, right? I want to lose 30 pounds. And, on some level, they might feel like, or they create these stories to, protect themselves from, taking action. They feel like they're going to have to exercise for hours a day. They're never going to be able to eat their favorite foods. They might not be that fun person anymore that always is down for whatever and says yes. So on some level, they feel like if they lose 30 pounds, they have to say no to all those things and they can't be that person anymore. So no matter what they do, they can have the best coaches, programs, diets in the world. If they don't reconcile that and work through that, then nothing's going to work. So ultimately, self-sabotage is fearing the very thing you say you want to accomplish. And you have to learn the stories you're telling yourself, the narratives you're telling yourself, and work through them. Because almost always they're assumptions, they're stories, but they're not actually facts, right? It's not actually true, right? You don't have to exercise for hours a day. You don't have to eat chicken and lettuce for every meal to lose weight.
What are the similarities between people in terms of that self sabotage, and what are the differences? Is it a recurring story, or is it just like kind of all over the map?
It's all over the map. I mean, some of the things are fascinating in terms of self-sabotage. I mean, there's one client who was worried about losing weight. And this comes after prodding and, building that rapport and trust where they feel comfortable. But on some level, she didn't want to lose weight because her husband liked her big butt, right? And she was worried that if she lost weight, she would lose that butt, right? So she's telling us she wants to lose weight. She has a great plan she felt comfortable with, but she felt that if she lost weight, she was gonna lose her butt, and she didn't want to do that. So we have to work with that. Then there's another person who they felt like they would never be able to have a drink again. Like they would have to give up alcohol, which is one of our core philosophies with our clients is we want them to be fit and happy, not fit and miserable. And to never indulge again, to never enjoy your favorite food is just not sustainable or desirable. So once we said, hey, that's not true, you can still enjoy, you can still drink if you'd like. Let's just work backwards, right? If those are your non-negotiables, and we always like to start with their non-negotiables, let's focus on things you are willing to negotiate on. So it runs the gamut in terms of what people kind of come up with, but there's always things they come up with.
And does that like appear right away, or do you really have to dig in to see like what that issue is? Does it? I assume it takes some work to find out what these problems are.
Totally. And absolutely, because there are times where you give someone a plan, they feel good about it. We talk about things like emotional and stress eating and all sorts of things. And sometimes it's not that deep. But if we're giving them a plan, they feel good about it, they're all in agreement, and they're constantly kind of, pressing the gas seemingly or pressing the brake. And it's just this constant like good day, bad day. There's definitely some self sabotage going on. And that's where it becomes evident. And we'll kind of bring it up and, we'll work through it.
And in terms of personality type, what's the what's the split between people who are easily coachable and those who aren't? Or what's the difference? How do you make that calculation?
Yeah, I think we're fortunate in that if someone's, for us, they're signing up for a coaching plan. So I think on some level, they're self-selecting that they are coachable. They realize that they're self-aware enough to realize that what they're doing isn't working. Of course, as we know, awareness is like the first step. So I would say majority of the people that sign up are very coachable. But there are times where, someone thinks they know everything, and often it's what we think we know that gets in the way. And we'll talk about it. And if we notice there's a lot of resistance, we have to address it head on, because if you don't, conquer that resistance, then it's just going to keep getting in the way. Right. And we'll say like, hey, we notice that when we suggest this, you're doing X. When we notice and we tackle it, we bring it up right away, and we work through it. Because for us, our goal is to help our clients stay consistent through anything and everything that gets in the way. And most of the things that get in the way are mental roadblocks versus, there's always the tactical challenges like birthdays, holidays, etc. But those are a lot easier to navigate.
What are some other just kind of like magnificent backflips of thinking that people do when they're like trying to get a result and then self-sabotaging or going back and forth? I'm sure you see all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so in terms, you mean related to self sabotage or just mindset stuff?
Self-sabotage, or just like they say that they're doing it right, but there's this big glaring thing that they're missing, or like someone is following the plan, but on top of that, they're also eating a block of cheese a day, like secretly, like whatever it is. There are all sorts of things that creep in, and we're amazing at putting our own blinders on. Like we don't know that we're doing this sometimes. So, what does that look like?
There's all sorts of things. I mean, there's, fear of failure, there's fear of success, there's all or nothing thinking. That gets in the way a lot, right? Where people feel like if they can't be perfect, then why bother? And what they typically do is they don't bother, right? So, I'm a recovering perfectionist, and it's very hard. When you're a perfectionist, you really feel like if you can't exercise perfectly, or I put that in air quotes, or exercise for an hour a day, whatever it might be, it's better to do nothing, right? So, working with these clients and saying, listen, instead of all or nothing, aim for always something, right? And that's a huge revelation and a huge breakthrough for people who are all or nothing types. Um, when it comes to self sabotage, I mean, the reasons are endless, but we have to understand on some level, every human wants to, avoid discomfort and chase pleasure, right? And many of us are trying to rationalize ways to do the easiest thing of all, which is do nothing, right? So we're constantly inventing these stories in our head to protect us from taking action, which can be scary. So that's a big part of what we work on is how do we make our clients feel less scared and more hopeful?
Do they feel like they need to transform into fitness bunnies as an identity, or what does that look like? Because some people are pretty resistant against that idea that like they have to turn into some gym rat or whatever to achieve these results. That's obviously not true, but how do you communicate that idea back and forth with them?
I think it's more, identity is certainly helpful and powerful, but I think we always try to focus more on just small behavior changes, right? And I think for a lot of people who don't associate or identify themselves as that idea is just daunting, right? Like I'm not that person. And for some people, they think, there's people who think that like healthy and fit people are selfish and arrogant. And then it's like, I always like to challenge that though. It's like, so you're telling me you've never met a person who's unhealthy or overweight, who's been selfish or arrogant? And like very quickly they realize, all right, that's silly, right? But they think like they associate in their mind, if I'm selfish, I'm sorry, if I'm fit and like that's the type of person I am. So you have to, very quickly challenge that.
Yeah, I mean, it's tempting to kind of build some of this stuff into our psychology without realizing that it's there. But in terms of the day-to-day habits that you're talking about, how do the macros line up for a lot of people? What sort of deficit are you looking at, or do you think about it that way? And how individualized is the process?
Yeah. So perhaps this is an unpopular opinion, but we try not to focus on counting calories or macros with our clients. We take a much more behavioral approach, just because, in my experience, and we've been at this for 17 years now. Counting macros does three things. Number one, it doesn't change your relationship with food. Number two, it relies solely on willpower, which always fades. And number three, it eventually makes you crazy, right? So we try to take just that behavioral based approach where you learn different things. You learn hunger cues. You learn why you're eating. You learn self sabotage. You learn how to kind of reconcile and work through these mental roadblocks that are getting in the way. And when you do that, you don't necessarily need to obsess over counting macros. That being said, we do take a very personalized approach, and we have some clients who just prefer, a numbers based approach, and we work with them as well. But if I had it my way, it would say, hey, let's try the behavioral based approach first and see how that works for you.
So it doesn't have to be some sort of bodybuilding competition approach, weighing your food and turning into that type of person to achieve these results.
No, I mean, listen, I personally don't. I don't think that's sustainable or desirable. Like, I really don't. I don't think most people are extremely busy, and they don't want this to be a second job, right? They want this to fit into their lifestyle versus having to change their entire life in order to get fit, right? Being fit should be an add-on, and it should work with the realities of your life.
What are some things that they don't understand at the beginning of the process as someone who's being newly coached that once they've achieved the results or they're on the path to achieve them that they do understand after that?
Interesting question. I would say a lot of people don't realize that. I would say one of the top reasons why people are overweight and not in the shape they want to be in is because A, they're eating more than they think they are, but B, they're eating emotionally, right? They're not eating when they're physically hungry. And, helping people overcome emotional and stress eating is a big part of what we do, right? Most people eat as a coping mechanism. They're stressed, they're anxious, or they're frustrated, they're disappointed. There's a million reasons why we eat. And as I like to say, it's never about the food. It's about what the food allows us to avoid and or the void it fills. So for them, I think they go into this thinking like, I can't stick with anything. I don't have discipline. I don't have willpower, whatever the reason. And then by the end, they're like, oh my God, I didn't realize how much of an emotional stress eater I was. And some people identify that as that upfront, but they still don't realize how much of the eating they were doing was not actually for hunger. It was for something else.
What is an example of that emotional hunger look like, or what are how does that process happen where they have that craving and then they fall for it or they go for it when they plan not to, but it happens anyway?
Yeah. So first off, there's the hot cold empathy gap, right? We wake up, we're motivated, we're raring to go. I got this. We feel like Rocky, right? Nothing can stop me. And then 3 hours later, someone brings donuts to the office, and we're like, oh, YOLO. I only live once. I want the donut. Why bother? And we underestimate how tempted we get in the moment. And what happens is there's a lot of self-talk, right? There's a lot of I deserve this. I work hard. I don't have any treats. I don't have any self-care. There's just a million things we come up with to rationalize eating it. And what happens is there's some sort of trigger, right? So it could be as simple as someone brings our favorite food in or something tempting, or our boss is driving us crazy, or our kids are driving us crazy. We feel uncomfortable, right? We feel this discomfort. And what we've become accustomed to is using food as a way to remove that discomfort, right? But we're not actually solving the issue. We're just really suppressing it, right? I like to think of, emotional eating as a door-to-door salesman, right? A good door-to-door salesman, they can drive you crazy, but they'll keep knocking on the door. And if you don't answer, they'll come back 2 hours later. And the best thing to do when it comes to emotional eating is to open the door, say, hi, how are you? Obviously make sure it's safe here, but like, hi, how are you? And deal with whatever it is, right? Like, no, thank you, and or deal with the emotion, and then that's it. Whereas if you keep ignoring it, it's going to keep coming back up. And that's what emotional eating is doing. You're just kind of suppressing how you're feeling. You're not really dealing with the root of the issue.
What about replacing that behavior of instead of going for those donuts at work, like do you have them consider doing something else instead to fulfill kind of that need or at least distract from the normal pattern of behavior?
Yeah. So the first step is to identify the triggers, right? So name all your triggers. It can be your kids, your boss, spouse, whatever it might be, right? Traffic. There's a million reasons. Then we come up with different ways to respond to those triggers in a different way, right? And part of the why our program is so effective is it's a rapid feedback cycle, right? So each day you're speaking with your coach, and we get to say, "Hey, how'd that work? If it worked well, great. If not, let's try this." But it's really simply about identifying the triggers and trying something else. And at the very beginning, it could be as simple as instead of not eating or do something completely different, just wait 2 minutes before you give into the food, right? And just building that pause is so effective.
Yeah, that kind of pattern of craving and thinking that it's real, but then understanding that it passes or it turns into something else if you just like tap the brakes a little bit is really empowering for a lot of people when they realize that they can do that because most of the things that happen over the course of the day and our behaviors and habits are pretty much automatic. So if you can start to program the right ones, then health becomes uh, pretty much the thing that is the new default. And I know that you've talked about that. So, what does a default pattern of behavior or day look like from the health perspective? What are people doing? Walking, being physically active. What are they eating? What does that look like typically?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like, you mean the mindsets, like instead, like, is that what you mean? More of like the mindsets?
Yeah, we could do mindset, and then we can talk about, what it literally looks like, kind of like scheduling out the morning, midday, and afternoon. What are you doing? What are you, more importantly, maybe not doing?
Yeah. I mean, I would say the mindset, A is, there's certainly planning and preparing ahead of time, obviously thinking through your day, as they say, if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. And of course, just because you plan doesn't ensure success, but it certainly increases the chances of success, right? So that helps a lot. But I also think it's just a big mindset shift is, you know, many people, they feel hungry and they eat, right? Whereas our most successful clients, they feel hungry and they think about what it is they're actually hungry for. Is it for food or is it for something else? And to your, you touched on this earlier, like so much of the emotional eating we do, or all emotional eating, is really choosing to be powerless in the moment, right? In a sense, we're kind of raising our hand in the air, so to speak, and saying, you know what? I don't want to deal with whatever it is that's bothering me, and I'm just going to eat to make myself feel better. Whereas the mindset we want to go with is the powerful approach and say, whatever it is that's bothering me, I can deal with, right? I can deal with whatever is bothering me, and we'll deal with it. And once we deal with it, amazingly, the cravings start to vanish, right? And that is such a big mindset shift. And it really, if I had to boil it down, it's essentially, instead of only focusing on what you're eating, you're really focusing on why you're eating. When you start to focus on why you're eating, then that's the start of changing your relationship with food.
And for the people who succeed, what do the daily habits look like? What do they include and or not include?
Yeah. So I mean, I would say, in terms of specifics of food, it's very hard because, as we touched on earlier, like, people come to us with all sorts of dietary preferences and, ways they want to do things. If someone wants to eat a certain way, I'm not going to say don't eat that way. Right. So, like, we're going to help them come up with the best way to eat in the way they want to eat. But in terms of the habits, I would say there's planning before you eat. I would say there's pausing before you eat, thinking about why you're actually hungry. If you're hungry for food, I would say there's eating slowly, right? As trite and as simple as it might sound, as common sense as it might sound, it's not common sense, right? So acting like you're a food critic, right? So putting your fork and knife down between bites, taking sips of water between bites of food. Allow yourself to feel how you feel as you're eating. Um, I would say identifying, where you are on what we call the hunger scale, right? So one being ravenous, like you can eat anything, and five feeling stuffed, like you just had a big Thanksgiving meal, right? Like identifying where you are on that during and after a meal is really powerful. Movement, I would say always default to movement when possible. I think a lot of people, again, feel like if they can't have the perfect workout, they don't do it. So if it's as simple as walking to the store instead of, or parking a little further or taking the stairs, like those are the types of habits and behaviors that make a big difference.
What about those dietary approaches? Because more than ever, I'm sure you can appreciate and you've noticed the same thing. The internet rewards extremism where it's just all plant based or all carnivore or totally intermittent fasting all the time, water fast for 10 plus days, whatever it is. What is your approach to managing those expectations for, I'm sure, some people who come in and expect to be coached as a pure carnivore or as a pure plant based person, whatever? And how do you kind of like drive them toward balance ultimately?
Yes. I find the fastest way to lose a client in terms of trust is to say the exact opposite of what they want to do. Right. If they're coming to us and they want to do keto, and I'm saying, well, here's 20 reasons why I wouldn't do keto, I'm going to lose them. Right. So I try to meet them where they are, establish that trust, establish that rapport. And as we work together, then I can say, you know what, did you ever think of this? Did you ever think of that? But if someone comes to us and they are dead set on intermittent fasting, and I tell them reasons why for them, for example, intermittent fasting isn't necessarily great for people who have a poor relationship with food. People who tend to binge eat, intermittent fasting is not the best approach, in my opinion. But if I tell them right away, they're just gonna be like, no, I want to do intermittent. They read something on the internet, they listened to some video, and they're convinced. And there's no changing that right off the bat.
And what does that look like to convince people over time? Is it just like being there every day? And it sounds like it's kind of a hands-off approach. The more dogmatic you are, the more they're going to be polarized against it, right?
Yeah, it's as you know, it's like psychological reactance, right? The more you say do this, the more they're going to want to do the opposite. Especially with kids, like you do one way, do this, they do the opposite. I think it's more of helping them get results, like because that nothing compels motivation and trust like results. And that's where the trust forms. And once you have trust, then then the sky's the limit in terms of what you can suggest.
Is it weight, pictures, how they feel? Like, what are the metrics?
All the above.
Yeah.
All the above. We met weight is one of them, but we love to see pictures. We love to see how they're responding to food. Instances where they would typically choose X, but they choose Y instead. Like that's a massive win. So it's all of the above.
What about the thing where, like, kind of lifelong people who have an interest in fitness have gotten over this hurdle of not wanting to work out? You don't want to go on that run. You don't want to lift that day, whatever it is. But you do it anyway because you know that you're going to feel better afterwards. Whereas, like, some other people who might not have that built into their personality or their habits over the course of life have a hard time getting over that hurdle. So, how do you help people with that?
Yeah, so that's tough. I think going from a state of inertia to a state of momentum is really powerful. When you're in that state of inertia, when you feel like a slug, nothing anyone says, it's like you don't feel like it, right? You're not in that mode. And what we always challenge our clients with is asking them one question. And the question is, what's the least I can do without doing nothing, right? So basically, we're getting them to take what I call a micro action, the smallest possible thing. You know, put your shoes on and go for a walk around the block, or do 5 reps or whatever it might be, but do the smallest possible action, because the only way to change your state is movement, right? But they think, doing too much, they're always in this battle of this conflict of that's too much, that's too daunting, so they don't do anything, and that's too little, it's not going to make a difference, right? And it's this constant battle. And when in doubt, always go smaller. So we're always encouraging them. What's the least I can do without doing nothing? And it gets them to move. And what they realize is, as you know, once you take a little action, once you move a little bit, once you have a little momentum, then it becomes easier and easier. It snowballs. But the hardest part is getting them to take that first step. And we stress that a lot.
Yeah, and I love to see that you're also a fan of micro workouts because that is just kind of a life changer, especially if you work from home or you work remotely. It's something that's a lot more achievable maybe than people who work in an office. But even at an office, there are a surprising amount of things that you can do without necessarily breaking a uncomfortable sweat where you're just like sweating beads in front of your boss or something like that. It doesn't have to be that way. But what are some quick things that people might be able to do, whether they're listening right now? Wherever they are to kind of achieve those micro workouts, and also why is that worth it?
Yeah. So micro workouts, get up from your desk, do 10 air squats. Get up from your desk, go, walk around the block or walk around the office. Next time you go to the store, park further than you usually do. Those little things make a difference. And the reason why they make a difference is they help you get out of that state of inertia, right? That is what we're trying to get out of. And the only way to get out of that state of inertia is through action, right? It's much easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than thinking your way into a new way of acting, right? You can think all you want and dream up ways, but until you move, then you're not going to change the way you feel.
What about age? How do people need to move their own goalposts or have their goals changed over time? Because in each decade of life, or kind of like each threshold that you pass, we need to reevaluate, and some things stop working as well as they used to, and maybe other things will work instead. So, what does that look like coaching people of a wide variety of ages?
Yeah, I mean, we always like to meet people where they are, what they have access to, what their goals are, what they aspire to. And I think a big part of what we do is definitely managing expectations. And, you know, you we always like to help, and we want to help people dream big, but always take the smallest possible action, right? Get them to dream big, but all right, great. But what's the smallest possible action we can do to get there? And again, kind of similar to what you were asking before in terms of like if someone comes to us wanting to do X, Y, or Z, even though we know it's crazy, like we kind of have to meet them where they are. So it's much easier for them to realize they can't do X than for us to tell them they can't do it. Right. So if someone wants to run a marathon at 90, like we might say, all right, well, let's start with, running around the block first. Right. And let them kind of feel how they feel, because I never want to rain on anyone's parade. That being said, managing expectations is certainly part of it. But I think, again, that comes with learning where they are, what their abilities are, and starting from there.
And for you, you're a runner, right? Have been for a long time.
Yeah, I like running. I mean, weightlifting is more my thing, but I do like to run a little bit.
Yeah, and most people don't put those two things together. I know earlier in my career as a runner, um, and I say career, it was never like a professional level or anything close to that. But I've always loved running, especially trail running and getting out in nature in it. And when you take away the weight training aspect of that, that's not necessarily a great way to be fit or to be capable or to have the ability to use your body in the way that functionally we should in this world. So how do you marry the running world to the world of weightlifting, which a lot of people, especially if they don't participate in kind of either side of that, they're just like, what? Like how and why would you ever do both? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, the ultimate trifecta, I think, is, first off, the right nutrition, weights, resistance training, and, cardiovascular training. Um, I think we're always trying to meet people where they are, but we're always trying to help them level up. And if someone likes running, many people, I think especially, years ago it was all about cardio, and there's no doubt in recent years weightlifting has made, become more popular. We'll say, hey, what do you think about weightlifting? And start small, right? And some people are, through and through, their weightlifters. I don't do cardio. And it's like, all right, this isn't just about like looking strong. It's also about, being healthy. And there's no doubt cardio is healthy, right? There's a lot of benefits of cardio, even though it might not help you build muscle per se, right? So if someone's, through and through weightlifting, we'll say, all right, what do you think about, let's try some, cardiovascular exercise. So it's this constant, battle of where they are and, encourage them to try a little more.
What does that look like for someone who hasn't engaged in strength training and then does? I'm sure there are a lot of surprises for people because like what a lot of people think the world of weightlifting looks like and what it actually looks like can be a lot different.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people, they think they're going to look like, Ronnie Coleman or Phil Heath, and it's like those people have dedicated their entire lives to it. They've taken every drug possible under the sun to look that way. Like, I promise you, you're not going to look that way, even if you tried. And, you hear it with women. It's like, I don't want to be bulky. Like, it's not so easy to look bulky. It takes a lot of resistance training. So, I think people are surprised at how being strong, how good it feels. I think they often realize, or they don't realize how powerful they are. And that's one of the most fun things is to hear from clients is like, hey man, I'm like a lot stronger than I thought I was, or I just feel, I like feeling strong. So, but it's always, I think people are often surprising themselves. And I think that's the job, or at least one of the many jobs of a good coach is you want to help people surprise themselves because if they're only doing what they know they can do, then that's great. But like you want to help them do things they didn't think they could do because that's where the confidence comes into play. That's where when you do hard things, that builds courage, right? I think one of the reasons why people love ice baths is like, hey man, I just sat in a cold tub for 3 minutes. I didn't think I could do it, and then I did it.
So, speaking about drugs, we can talk about some of those things that hormone replacement therapy, stem cells, peptides, they're all getting a lot of attention right now. When we met and hung out in person, we had a really interesting conversation about some of that. But what's your take on kind of the current state of hormone replacement therapy and the way that a lot of people are thinking about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, maybe I'm just, I'm lifetime natural. The only thing I've ever taken is protein powders. You know, for me, I think you should do everything you possibly can naturally before you go down that route. And it seems like on social media, some people think like, hormone, HRT, whatever it is, TRT, like all these things are the answer. And it's like, have you done everything you possibly can naturally first? And my approach is always like, do that first, because once you introduce uh, these substances, I mean, there's always side effects. There's always unintended side effects. I would never do that unless you're doing everything you possibly can naturally.
Yeah, I'm with you. Which is, it seems like we're in the minority these days, but I think there are more of us out there than most people realize. It's just that sort of message, like be balanced, try to be natural as long as you can, isn't quite as sexy on social media reels or whatever.
Right. And like, it is, I don't know. I listen, there's no judgment. I just think do everything you possibly can first naturally. If your levels are still low, then sure, I guess do what you have to do. No doubt about that. Right. But like it's amazing what happens to your body when you exercise and eat well consistently. A lot of those numbers that you think are low can absolutely increase if you're doing those things, right? And then, of course, on social media, it always makes me laugh. Like, not that I ever want to be one or like whatever, but like you look at some of these professional bodybuilders, and all of them, again, are essentially, they're basically professional drug addicts. Doesn't mean they're not doing insane amounts of hard work and eating, essentially perfectly and exercising. But like, these people are worried about like eating organic chicken breasts, yet they're putting all sorts of crap into their body. It's just like, the irony is just a little ridiculous.
So, how does that relate to longevity, or how do you think about longevity? Because also there are all sorts of buzzwords and biohacky and kind of wacky things that are coming to the fore recently. But and I'm not sure about you, but I kind of take a similar approach to looking at the world of longevity, where it doesn't have to be all these whiz bang magic bullet type deals. It's actually a lot more simple and habit based.
Yeah, I think to me, the best way is sustainability. And if what you're doing is not sustainable, then by definition, of course, it's a short term thing. And I think um, whether that's adding drugs to your routine or not, like, are you planning on doing that for the rest of your life? I don't know how sustainable that is. So to me, it's always like, how sustainable is this? Can I see myself doing this for the rest of my life? If so, great. I think that's you have a massive advantage. That's the way I look at it. How about you?
Yeah, I totally agree. But some of it too is more about walking, living in a place where you can surround yourself with a culture that you appreciate, that brings you out into the world, that makes walking easier, or biking, kind of this low key recreational activity, or surrounding yourself with people who love to play pickleball. If you love to play pickleball, going and getting coffee with your friends, sitting around drinking wine or eating dinner for 3 or 4 hours, like some people in Europe do. If you look at the blue zones, you look at the people who are actually living a long time. It's a very cultural type thing, and it's important to, like, sometimes we think that we need to sacrifice our happiness in order to achieve health, but I think it's actually kind of the opposite in a lot of ways. You need to nourish your happiness such that you have the motivation to engage in these pretty simple but highly repeatable behaviors that start to become automatic, that leads to great results for people. Because and it surprises a lot of people out there that many of their coaches who try to coach them toward health, or performance, when it as it relates to in business or in fitness, like those people, the coaches don't want to work out either. The professional athletes get up in the morning, they're like, I don't think I can do it today, but they still find a way to do it, and they find a way to make that meaningful to them.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well said.
So what about let's touch on this real quick first. There are certain substitutions that people can make that, um, at first glance, you might not think that you could still have a lot of fun eating and be healthy. But I know that in your work you talk about, there's a big difference between eating white bread or Ezekiel. You can sub something like potato chips for air popped popcorn. You can still get that like kind of crunchy, salty thing. And it was so funny, like going through your list of swaps, because like so many of these show up in our own lives. So we found a way to, instead of eating the traditional ice cream, we'll make that protein pudding or something like that with chia seeds, or some other ingredient. What are some other like substitutions or ways to make eating fun that are also healthful that might surprise people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest thing you can always do right off the bat is controlling your portions, right? Just so that you don't want to change what you eat, you can always change how much you eat. And that just brings up an interesting thing of like, we all have foods that when we eat, we become insatiable, where we just feel like we want more and more, right? And if that's one of those foods, then it's probably best to substitute it. But if you're able to have, one or two of X or Y and like be good with it, then that's great. So you can always start with less. But, I think there's, I'm trying to think some, easy substitutions. So like, I love potato chips, and I've realized it's, the salt and crunch. Pickles, again, obviously they're not potato chips, but pickles actually do the trick. They're salty, they're crunchy. That helps a lot, right? Whereas like, what else? I've realized I love hamburgers, like hamburgers And an easy fix though is I've realized what I love the most though is like the lettuce, tomato, and onion and pickle with it. So I can sometimes easily skip the bun, but have the lettuce, tomato, onion, pickle, and it feels like I'm getting like 90% of the way there and skipping the bun if I want to. Um, but my latest philosophy really, and like it's been for a while, it's like, you know, go ruthless for the meals that don't matter, for the everyday meals, so that when you want to indulge, you can do it guilt free. So, my boys, love pizza, they love ice cream. Like, I'm going to allow myself to indulge with them. But if I'm alone and it's just a normal, Tuesday, I'm not going to likely choose pizza because I want to save it in a way for them.
Are there any other tips that you'd give to parents out there? Because everyone can kind of come up with excuses, and maybe the most valid one is being a parent of young children. So, like, how do you help people work through that, or how do you work through that in your own life, where you're trying to maximize your own health as well as that for your family?
Yeah, well, I think the best thing to remember is that, and I'm certainly no parenting expert. I don't play one on the internet or TV, but I've learned that, kids don't really listen to what you say. They do what you do, right? And I can say I want my kids to be super healthy. I can say I want them to exercise a lot, and I can tell them to do that, or I can just actually eat a certain way and model the behavior I want them to, follow. And that's what I try to do, right? And they'll see me eating certain foods, they'll see me exercising, and to me, one of the I wouldn't say it's the happiest day of my life, but I was super happy. It was like, my oldest just turned 10, and he's like, "Hey, Daddy, can I exercise with you?" Not once have I ever said, "Hey, you should exercise," or "You want," like, not once. Because again, going back to what we talked earlier, I think the more you push, the more they go the other way. But he just thought that was normal, right? He thought that was normal everyday behavior, and that was amazing, right? Because it's like I've modeled the behavior I would love for him to incorporate into his own life, and he's like, "Hey, Daddy, can we exercise?" And my youngest too, who's 7, has been doing the same thing. So that's been wonderful. So I think the best thing to do is, be the person you want them to be, really.
What about working with coaches and trying to build that up as a business model? How do you go from, and we have a lot of coaches and people who have their own practices who listen to this. So I'm sure they're curious as well. Like, how do you start turning your processes into something where it's not just one-to-one coaching, but um, coaching other coaches to achieve these results when there are just so many variables at play? How do you do that?
Yeah, I think you have to, number one is kind of come up with a formula, right? A repeatable formula, right? So, what are we doing that we feel is different? And how can we teach other coaches to do that, right? So, we have methodologies, we have strategies, we have tactics that we teach our clients that other coaches can incorporate into their own practice. And then they're also, using our proprietary software with their own clients. So, I think the first thing is like, how can you standardize what you're doing? How can you come up with, a standard approach? This is what we do depending on, different scenarios. But it's also about hiring world-class coaches to begin with, right? People who don't necessarily want to focus on the business aspect of coaching. They'd rather just do what they love, which is coaching, right? They want to just be a practitioner. And that's really where we help a lot of our coaches, because they don't want to worry about the business side. They just want to do what they love.
Yeah. And that's a great point too, because people who are trying to do it on their own, those are very different skill sets and different ways to spend your time. And so sometimes it can be advantageous to kind of pool those resources so that you can specialize and do what you really want to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, right on. Adam, so much fun to talk to you, man. What is the best place for people to find your work in My Body Tutor?
Yeah, thanks so much. Again, this was so much fun. We have two ways. So number one, mybodytutor.com. That's where our one-to-one coaching program is. If you have any health and fitness goals, we'd love to help you. And then about 5 years ago, we launched our MPH certification accountability program. So that's for people who are already coaches themselves and want to learn what we do with our coaches. And you can find that on our website as well. But those two ways, we're on all the socials, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, at My Body Tutor. Would love to hear from you. I'm always an email away. You can reach me directly at adam@mybodytutor.com. Besides my family, this is what I live for. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Right on. Adam, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks again for having me.
Hey, Abel here one more time. And if you believe in our mission to create a world where health is the norm, not sickness, here are a few things you can do to help keep this show coming your way. Click like, subscribe, and leave a quick review wherever you listen to or watch your podcasts. You can also subscribe to my new Substack channel for an ad-free version of this show in video and audio. That's at abeljames.substack.com. You can also find me on Twitter or X, YouTube, as well as Fountain FM, where you can leave a little crypto in the tip jar. And if you can think of someone you care about who might learn from or enjoy this show, please take a quick moment to share it with them. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.